The text message came at 2:47 a.m. on what should have been the happiest night of my life. Check your email. I'm sorry you had to find out this way. I was still in my wedding dress, makeup smeared from tears of joy just hours before. But when I opened that email and saw the photos attached, my entire world crumbled. The man I had just married, the love of my life, wasn't who I thought he was. And the person who exposed it all, a wedding photographer, someone I'd trusted to capture the most important day of my life. My name is Sarah, and this is the story of how my fairy tale wedding became my worst nightmare, and how the very person documenting our love story became the one to destroy it. It all started 3 years ago when I met David at a coffee shop downtown. I was working as a marketing coordinator for a small tech company, and he was this charming architect who always seemed to have the perfect thing to say. You know, that feeling when you meet someone and it just clicks? That was us. He was tall, had these incredible green eyes, and this laugh that could light up an entire room. Our first date lasted 8 hours. We went for dinner and ended up walking around the city until sunrise, talking about everything and nothing. He told me about his dreams of designing sustainable buildings, about how he wanted to travel the world and see different architectural styles. I shared my passion for digital marketing and my secret dream of starting my own agency someday. We just fit. David was everything I thought I wanted in a partner. He was ambitious, funny, and incredibly thoughtful. He remembered the little things, how I liked my coffee, that I was afraid of thunderstorms, that my favorite flowers were peonies, not roses. When I had a bad day at work, he'd show up with Thai food and a bottle of wine. When I got promoted 6 months into our relationship, he surprised me with a weekend getaway to celebrate. Those first 2 years were like something out of a romantic movie. We moved in together after about a year, found this perfect little apartment with exposed brick walls and huge windows that David loved for the natural light. He'd spend hours at his drafting table in the corner, designing buildings while I worked on my laptop on the couch. And we'd exist in this comfortable bubble of domestic bliss. We traveled together, spent a long weekend in Charleston where David took pictures of the architecture, and I fell in love with the food scene. We went to his college friend's wedding in Colorado, where David spent the entire reception talking to the photographer about angles and lighting. I remember thinking it was cute how interested he was in the technical aspects of capturing perfect moments. David proposed on the beach, where we had our third date. He'd hidden the ring in a picnic basket, and when I found it, he gave this beautiful speech about how he wanted to build a life with me, literally and figuratively. The ring was perfect, a vintage Art Deco setting with a round diamond, exactly what I would have chosen for myself. Later, I'd wonder how he knew me so well, or if he actually knew me at all. The wedding planning was intense. David had very specific ideas about everything. He wanted certain flowers, specific colors, particular venues. At first, I thought it was sweet that he was so involved. Most guys I knew couldn't care less about wedding details. But looking back, there were moments when his insistence on certain choices felt less like enthusiasm and more like control. The first weird thing happened when we were choosing our wedding photographer. I'd researched dozens of photographers, created spreadsheets, comparing prices and styles, the whole 9 yards. But David kept pushing for this one specific photographer, Marcus Chun. His work was beautiful, I'll give him that. But something about him made me uncomfortable. Marcus was probably in his early 30s, had this intense way of looking at people, like he was always studying them for the perfect shot. When we met him for our engagement session, he asked a lot of personal questions, not just about the wedding, but about our relationship, how we met, what we loved about each other. David ate it up, going into elaborate detail about our story, but it felt intrusive to me. He's just passionate about his work, David said. When I mentioned feeling uncomfortable, good photographers need to understand their subjects. During our engagement shoot, Marcus kept positioning us in ways that felt awkward. He'd have David stand behind me with his hands on my waist, then ask him to whisper something in my ear while Marcus captured my natural reaction. Or he'd have us walking away from the camera while he took candid shots from behind. Later, when we saw the photos, they were stunning. But I couldn't shake the feeling that Marcus was more interested in photographing David than capturing us as a couple. Then there were David's late nights. He'd always worked long hours, architecture is a demanding field, but in the months leading up to our wedding, he was staying out later and later. Big project, he'd say, kissing me on the forehead as he came to bed at 1 or 2 a.m. You know how it is. Except I didn't know how it was. Because David had always been good about communicating his work schedule before. He'd text me updates, complain about difficult clients, share exciting developments, but suddenly his work became this mysterious thing he couldn't discuss. Client confidentiality, he'd say with a shrug when I asked about his projects. You understand, his phone habits changed too. David used to be completely open with his phone, would hand it to me to show me funny memes. Leave it lying around the apartment without a second thought. But he started keeping it face down, taking calls in other rooms, sleeping with it under his pillow instead of on his nightstand. When I mentioned it, he got defensive. I'm not hiding anything, Sarah. Work has just been stressful. I don't want to bore you with all the technical stuff. Despite the weird feelings I'd been having, our wedding day started perfectly. The venue was a restored historic mansion with gardens that looked like something from a fairy tale. My bridesmaids helped me into my dress, a flown-a-line with delicate lace sleeves that David had specifically requested I try on. At the time, I thought it was romantic that he'd seen it in a magazine and thought it would be perfect for me. The ceremony was beautiful. David cried when he saw me walking down the aisle, and his vows were everything I'd dreamed of. He talked about building a foundation strong enough to last a lifetime, about being grateful every day that I'd chosen to trust him with my heart. He promised to be honest, faithful, and to always put our relationship first. Marcus was everywhere with his camera, capturing every moment. He had this way of being invisible until you noticed him. Then suddenly he'd be right there, lens focused on some intimate moment. During our first dance, he kept circling this, getting shots from every angle. I remember thinking he was almost too dedicated to his job. The reception was magical. Our friends and family were having a blast. The food was incredible, and Dave and I barely left each other's sides all night. We danced to songs that meant something to us, took photos with everyone we loved, and I felt like the luckiest woman in the world. Around 11 p.m., David stepped outside to take a call. "Work emergency," he said, kissing my cheek. "I'll just be a few minutes." That few minutes turned into 20, then 30. When he came back, he seemed different, distracted. When I asked if everything was okay, he just smiled and said everything was perfect, but there was something in his eyes that wasn't quite right. We stayed until almost 2 a.m., saying goodbye to the last of our guests and soaking in the final moments of our perfect day. We were planning to spend our wedding night at the hotel attached to the venue before flying out for our honeymoon to Italy the next afternoon. We had just gotten back to our hotel room. I was sitting at the vanity, carefully removing all the bobby pins from my hair and thinking about how surreal it was that I was now Mrs. David Harrison. David was in the bathroom, and I could hear him brushing his teeth. That's when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Check your email. I'm sorry you had to find out this way." My stomach dropped immediately. Who would be texting me at almost 3 a.m. on my wedding night? And what would I be finding out? With shaking hands, I opened my email app. There was a new message from the same unknown number with the subject line, "What you need to know about your husband." I almost deleted it, almost convinced myself it was some kind of spam or cruel prank, but something made me open it. The email had no text, just a series of photo attachments. With my heart pounding, I clicked on the first one. It was a photo of David, but not David at our wedding, or any event I remembered. He was in what looked like a restaurant, sitting across from another man. They were holding hands across the table, and David was leaning in close, the same way he leaned into me during intimate conversations. I scrolled to the next photo. David and the same man walking hand in hand down a street I didn't recognize. Then another, the two of them kissing outside what looked like a hotel. Photo after photo of my husband with another man. Intimate moments, romantic dinners, weekend getaways I knew nothing about. In one photo, they were at what looked like a pride parade, David's arm around the other man's waist, both of them laughing and holding rainbow flags. The final photos made me physically nauseous. David and this man in bed together, clearly intimate, clearly not a recent development based on how comfortable they looked with each other. But the worst part, I recognized the photography style, the composition, the lighting, the angles. These weren't random paparazzi shots or someone trying to expose David. These were professional photographs, taken by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. These were Marcus's photos. I sat there for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, staring at these images that completely destroyed everything I thought I knew about my life. David came out of the bathroom, saw me sitting there with my phone, and his face went completely white. "Sarah, what's wrong?" I turned the phone toward him, showing him the photos. I watched his face cycle through confusion, recognition, panic, and finally, resignation. "I can explain," he said quietly. "Can you?" My voice sounded strange, distant. "Can you explain how my husband of 6 hours has been having an affair with a man for God knows how long? Can you explain how our wedding photographer has intimate photos of you with someone else?" David sat down heavily on the edge of the bed, his head in his hands. It's not what you think. It's not what I think. I stood up, still in my wedding dress, feeling like I was in some kind of nightmare. David, there are photos of you in bed with another man. What exactly am I supposed to think? He looked up at me with tears in his eyes. His name is Alex. We've been together for 2 years. 2 years. Our entire relationship had been a lie. But I love you too, Sarah. I do. I thought I could make this work. Thought I could be the husband you deserved by lying to me. By marrying me while you're in love with someone else. It's complicated. My family, my career, everything I've built. I couldn't just throw it all away. So you threw me away instead? David started crying then. These big, ugly sobs that would have broken my heart if I hadn't been completely numb. I never meant for this to happen. I thought the feelings for Alex would go away. I thought marrying you would help me be the person I'm supposed to be. And Marcus, how does he fit into all this? David wiped his eyes. Alex is Marcus's boyfriend, ex-boyfriend. Now, I guess Marcus found out about us, about you, about the wedding. He's been trying to get Alex to leave me, to tell you the truth. So he decided to do it himself. He said he couldn't watch me destroy your life just to hide who I really am. The rest of that night was a blur of phone calls, tears, and revelations that kept getting worse. I called my parents, my maid of honor, anyone who could help me process what was happening. David packed a bag and left the hotel, supposedly to give me space to think, but really because he couldn't face what he'd done. Over the next few days, as I canceled our honeymoon and dealt with the logistics of what happens when your marriage implodes before it even begins, more truth came out. The late nights hadn't been work, they'd been dates with Alex. The client confidentiality was really David trying to hide his double life. Even our apartment, which I'd loved so much, had been a place where David brought Alex when I was traveling for work. Marcus called me a few days after the wedding. I almost didn't answer, but I needed to understand why he'd done what he did. I know you probably hate me, he said without preamble, but I couldn't let him do this to you. Why didn't you just refuse to photograph the wedding? I tried. Alex begged me not to get involved, said David would leave you eventually and come clean on his own. But when I saw how happy you were during the engagement shoot, how much you loved him, I knew he was never going to tell you the truth. Marcus explained that he'd been documenting David and Alex's relationship for months. Not because he was trying to expose them, but because Alex had hired him for a different project and their relationship had developed naturally. In front of his camera, when David started planning to marry me, Marcus couldn't stand the idea of being complicit in such a massive deception. The photos I sent you weren't even the worst ones, Marcus said. I have pictures of them apartment hunting together, looking at rings, talking about their own future. David was living two completely separate lives. The annulment process was humiliating. I had to explain to lawyers, to judges, to anyone who would listen that my marriage had been based on fraud, that my husband had married me while being in a committed relationship with someone else, and that he'd hidden his sexuality from me completely. David tried to reach out several times in the weeks after the wedding. He sent flowers, wrote long letters, explaining his confusion about his sexuality and his fear of disappointing his conservative family. He claimed he genuinely loved me and had hoped that marriage would help him suppress his feelings for Alex. But the damage was done. It wasn't just the cheating, though, that was devastating enough. It was the complete betrayal of trust, the realization that our entire relationship had been built on lies. Every romantic gesture, every intimate moment, every time he'd told me he loved me, ... How much of it had been real? I found out later that David and Alex had gotten back together almost immediately after our annulment was finalized. They moved to another city, started over somewhere they could be open about their relationship. Part of me was happy that David could finally be honest about who he was, but the selfish part of me was furious that he'd destroyed my life to figure out his own. The worst part was dealing with everyone else's reactions. Some people blamed me for not seeing the signs. Others acted like I should be grateful that Marcus had saved me from a fraudulent marriage. A few suggested that I should have been more understanding of David's struggle with his sexuality. But here's the thing. I would have been understanding if he'd been honest with me, if he'd told me he was questioning his sexuality, if he'd ended our relationship before it got to the point of marriage, if he'd given me the choice to decide whether I wanted to be with someone who wasn't sure about their feelings for me. Instead, he made that choice for me, and in doing so, he stole months of my life and nearly destroyed my ability to trust anyone again. It's been almost a year now since that awful night. I've been in therapy, trying to rebuild my sense of self-worth, and my ability to trust my own judgment. I've started my own marketing agency, something I probably wouldn't have had the courage to do if my safe, predictable life hadn't been completely. I'm dating again, slowly and cautiously. It's hard to open up to someone when you've learned that people can lie so convincingly for so long about something so fundamental. But I'm trying not to let David's deception turn me into someone cynical and closed off. Marcus and I actually stayed in touch, which surprised everyone, including me. He felt terrible about having to be the one to deliver such devastating news, and I realized that he'd actually saved me from years of living a lie. We're not friends exactly, but there's a strange bond between us. He's the person who cared enough about a stranger to tell her a truth that no one else would. I never got closure with David, not really. He sent one final letter about 6 months ago, apologizing again and telling me that he and Alex were engaged. He said he hoped I could find happiness and forgiveness, and that someday I'd understand that he never meant to hurt me. The thing is, I do understand that he didn't mean to hurt me, but understanding his motivations doesn't erase the damage he did. It doesn't give me back the time I spent planning a future with someone who was already committed to someone else. It doesn't undo the humiliation, or the way this experience has colored every relationship I've had since. There's one thing that still keeps me up at night. One question I'll probably never have a satisfactory answer to. How long was David planning to keep living this double life? If Marcus hadn't intervened, would David have gone through with the marriage and just continued seeing Alex on the side? Would he have eventually left me for Alex? Or would he have kept both relationships going indefinitely? Was there ever a moment when he considered being honest with me? Or was the plan always to use me as a cover for the life he really wanted? I think about this a lot because it affects how I view not just David, but everyone. If someone could lie so completely about something so fundamental for so long, what else might people be hiding? How do you ever really know someone? But I'm trying not to let these questions consume me. I'm trying to focus on the fact that the truth did come out, that I didn't waste years or decades on someone who couldn't be honest about who he was. I'm trying to see Marcus's intervention as a gift, even though it felt like a curse at the time. Sometimes people ask me if I regret the relationship with David entirely. The answer is complicated. I loved him, or I loved who I thought he was. Those feelings were real. Even if his weren't entirely the experiences we shared, the growth I went through during our time together, those things shaped me into who I am today. But I also can't ignore the fact that our entire relationship was built on a fundamental deception. David knew from the beginning that he was attracted to men, knew that he had feelings for Alex specifically, and chose to pursue a relationship with me anyway. That's not a mistake or confusion about sexuality. That's a deliberate choice to prioritize his own comfort over my right to make informed decisions about my life. I've learned to hold both truths simultaneously, that love can be real even when it's not enough, and that good intentions don't excuse harmful actions. The experience has made me more cautious in relationships, but also more confident in my own worth. I know now that I deserve someone who chooses me completely, not someone who sees me as a convenient cover for the life they're afraid to live openly. So here's my question for all of you listening. If you discovered that someone you loved had been living a double life, could you forgive them? And more importantly, do you think Marcus was right to expose David's secret? Or should he have stayed out of it and let me discover the truth on my own? If I ever did, let me know in the comments below. Your perspectives might help me finally put this chapter of my life to rest.